In today's lecture, we're going to look at sensory information as well as a little bit of what is perception. There's going to be another lecture that follows this that looks a little bit more in depth into perception. Today, we're mostly looking at sensation and just using perception to kind of give a little bit of a reference, a point of reference to contrast what sensation is. So sensation is the process of detecting and converting and transmitting raw sensory information from the external and internal environments to the brain. Basically taking data from outside and sometimes even inside and sending that to the brain where it'll then be processed and will be made into something that actually makes sense to the person. And when the brain is trying to make sense of things, that's perception. That's when we select, we organize, we interpret sensory information into meaningful patterns. I have a few examples of this in the next couple of slides. So when we take a look at these pictures regarding a cube and this picture of a woman, is the orientation of the cube pointing upwards or downwards, to the left or to the right? How do you know which is the top or the bottom or the back of the cube? Likewise, with this other optical illusion, is this a young woman looking over her shoulder or an older woman looking downward? Now, when you're using your senses, all you see is essentially black and white. You see maybe straight lines and curved lines, but it's not quite making sense yet. Using your senses is just kind of taking in the light and transmitting it to your retina, where it's going to be sent to the brain via your optic nerve, and then your brain has received the data. When you begin to make sense of it and you start to think, this is a block, this is pointing left and down, or the one on the right is a woman, she's looking over her shoulder or perhaps looking downward, that's when you're using perception. That's when you're actually taking those light cues that are being transmitted at you, and you're beginning to make sense of them and form meaning from it. Another couple examples, again, the information comes in from the environment through your various senses. Your brain's going to receive that, and then only once your brain receives it will you begin to use perception. If you're looking at a tree, the tree is emitting these light waves, and you're not sure, if we could put like a little bit of a card in place, like stop the transmission from like the moment from sensation to perception. You don't know what it is. You see green, you see, perhaps something that takes up a large portion of your field of vision. You'll see some brown that takes up like a little bit of the field of vision. That's all, if you didn't have a brain, that's all you could really make sense of, with the raw sensory information. But let's remove that card that's blocking the transmission from sensory information into perception, and now that you have, you can use your brain again, you could begin to make sense of that tree and say, well, this is a tree. I'm looking at a collection of leaves and a trunk, and looking at the environment it's placed in, maybe there's some grass or other similar trees nearby. I can then use my brain to make sense of this and say, this is a tree that I'm seeing in the environment. Now, our various five senses use a variety of different methods to take information in from the environment and from within to take that information and send it to the brain for processing. So for vision, we see light waves, and we have these light-sensitive rods and cones in our eye's retina. We'll be looking at that in a little bit, and that's how essentially that we're going to be taking in that information from the environment. Likewise with audition, that's not trying out for a school play or anything like that. Audition is the term of regarding hearing. And so there are these sound waves that come into these pressure-sensitive hair cells in our ears cochlea, where we hear this and we can first get that sense, that transmission of sound, and it needs to be received before the brain can even begin to make sense of it. And we'll go through all these senses in just a little while. Something I want to touch on, though, that's very important to distinguish between sensory and perception is that the difference between bottom-up and top-down processing. Now, when we use bottom-up processing, this is when information begins at the bottom. Essentially, with the raw sensory data, we're using our eyes to look at something, and then it's going to be sent up to the brain for kind of higher level analysis. This is what we do on a regular basis of just maybe seeing a novel picture being placed into a new environment, and we need to make sense of it first. So we're going to take in all the different sights and sounds and smells and everything, the temperature of the room and whatnot, and we're going to take all that information and send it up to our brain to try to make sense of where exactly are we and what are these things all around us. Top-down processing, on the other hand, is when information starts at the top with the higher level processes, like in the brain, and then working down. That you begin to use your senses then to perhaps achieve a goal. Top-down processing is often very goal-directed. For example, when you have a mental image in your mind that you haven't seen it yet in front of you, but you have a mental image in your mind, and you're going to use that mental image to essentially apply it to your field of vision in front of you and look for this. A well-known example of this is a Where's Waldo puzzle. When you pull up a sheet of Where's Waldo and you see people walking all over, maybe they're on the beach and you see beach towels and umbrellas and the ocean, and there's the beach balls and there's kids and adults, and I mean, when you first look at it, it's just going to be a sea of color. That's going to be the bottom-up processing. You've got just a lot of stuff coming at your senses that you need to, at least your visual sense, that you need to make sense of. So you're using bottom-up processing, you'll be looking at this picture and deciding, so what exactly is this in front of me? Well, it looks like people, and it looks like they're in a particular setting, namely a beach. And it looks like that some are running and some are walking. Some have more clothes on, some have less clothes on. Using top-down processing is the exact action of finding Waldo. Now, when you go to look at a Where's Waldo picture, a lot of times you're not going to see him right away. And in fact, you may actually see some things that look just like him. So using top-down processing, you're going to form this mental image thinking, okay, Waldo has blue jeans, he has this red and white striped shirt, these big black glasses, and like a little beanie hat kind of on top. Waldo has a very distinct look to him. So you could form this mental image even without using your senses yet, like you don't see him yet. So using that mental image, starting at the top, then you're going to use your visual sense to look throughout that picture, to comb through the picture and to find where Waldo is. That's top-down processing. Bottom-up processing, just getting the picture in the first place and saying, what am I looking at? What's this picture that's been handed to me? Oh, okay, it's people, they're walking around, it's a beach, and there's umbrellas and beach balls. Making sense of it using your senses. Top-down processing, on the other hand, again, is the search for Waldo. You don't see him yet, but you know what he looks like, so you're going to use your sense to try to find where Waldo is in that picture. Again, just to further clarify the difference between senses and perception, as well as particular processing levels at the sensory level, as then later at the perceptual level. So there are four forms of sensation processing. There's the sensory detection, using your eyes, your ears, your other sense organs with their various receptor cells, and you're using these to detect and process the sensory information, kind of the very basic level of sensory processing, simply detecting it. Transduction occurs when you convert the receptor's energy into neural impulses that are then sent on to the brain. That's the actual kind of translation, again, also known as transduction, of the energy and turning it into something that's going to be that the brain will understand, namely neural impulses. Coding converts sensory inputs into different sensations. So actually being able to convert some of what you're feeling or seeing and being able to feel it and to see it in unique and particular ways. And lastly, sensory reduction occurs when you filter and analyze incoming sensations before sending the neural messages on to the cortex. So if we were to sense everything in our environment, we may become overloaded with information. The brightness of a room and the colors of, all the colors that you might see on a television, but also within your periphery of people walking back and forth. Your eyes do a very good job, and with the assistance of your brain, to kind of mute some of this. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later as well with regarding selective attention in perception. The bottom line here, though, is that when you go to use your senses, they're very quick to kind of filter out some of the unnecessary information so that you can be more efficient in how you're sensing the environment. So these neural impulses, again, come from our sensory receptors in our eyes, our ears, our skin, and our other sensory organs. They create these neural messages that are sent to various areas of the brain. We can't just take light from the world around us and send those light waves straight to our brain. Our brain essentially doesn't understand that. So our sensory organs essentially translate that. They use transduction to take some of that information in the environment, the light waves, the sound waves, and so on, and turn it into neural impulses so that our brain can make even better sense of it and can begin the next step of perceptual processing. A few terms that are important to keep in mind. Psychophysics is actually a pretty interesting area. This studies the link between the physical characteristics of stimuli and our sensory experience. So what is it about this thing that we're looking at, that we're touching, that we're smelling, that we're listening to, that we're tasting? What is it about that links the like in its physical sense? What is it about it in its physical sense that is related to our sensory experience? What is it about a teddy bear that feels soft to our skin? Like what exactly about the hairs feel soft to us versus the hairs on like a scrub brush that you'd use on when you do dishes? That they're both little hairs, but on one hand, one's very, very rough to the touch and one's very, very soft. So psychophysics looks into exactly this. What is it about the physical characteristics that present different sensory experiences? Another important term, the absolute threshold. This is the smallest amount of a stimulus that we can reliably detect. So this can be this is often done in a lab when like for example sounds are produced where they'll turn the frequency down very low, and there's going to be a point where say ask somebody to hold their hand up and say keep your hand up as long as you can hear it. After a certain point, turning it down, the person's going to lower their hand because they can't hear it anymore. They turn it up again and say raise your hand as soon as you can just barely detect it. Their hand goes up as soon as they hear it. They may test that out a few times and try to find out where that level is. That's the absolute threshold. Where can I reliably place a sound on a particular frequency, just as one sensory example? Where can I put a sound so that a person can just barely detect it every time I present it in that way? Now, the difference threshold is kind of similar, but again, there's a very important distinction here. This is the minimal difference needed to detect a stimulus change. It's also called the just noticeable difference. With regard to, let's go back to sound again, that we could place a sound frequency, let's say in like kind of a moderate range where we can all hear it, and we're not necessarily looking whether the person can hear it or not. So we place kind of like a hum at a particular sound frequency, and we may turn the frequency up very gradually and then ask the person raise your hand as soon as you notice that it's changed. Not necessarily high or low, just asking the person when do you detect the change? So they then raise their hand and say, okay, I notice that it seems to be higher. Again, they try it out a few times and they want to find out in terms of sound frequency, perhaps, what is the difference that I need to provide before a person can say reliably it's gone up or it's gone down and that they were correct. That's the difference threshold. So regarding thresholds, these are some interesting little tidbits of trivia. Regarding vision, the absolute threshold, again, like the very lowest bit that the average person can begin to sense something. For vision, it's a candle flame seen 30 miles away on a clear, dark night. So all efforts or all other stimuli controlled. We have a very, very dark night. It's clear. There's no fog or anything. Nothing obstructing the vision. We can take a candle flame 30 miles away, and a person will at that point be able to say, yes, something has been lit up. Pretty interesting. Regarding hearing, using sound waves as a stimulus, the average person can detect the tick of a watch at about 20 feet distance. That's pretty sizable distance. You think about a lot of classrooms are about 20 feet long. In some homes, you may have about 20-foot distance in the largest room of your house, or perhaps connecting a couple of rooms. And you think about reducing all of the other sounds in the environment down to the quietest possible level, and somebody standing at the very far end of that larger room that you're in, about 20 feet away, if they're wearing a watch that ticks, you'll be able to hear it. Regarding taste, again, the stimulus being chemical substances that contact the tongue and your taste buds. 1 teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water. I remember when I first looked at this, I thought it was pretty interesting because I thought 1 teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water sounds like kind of a lot for there to be, the lowest bit of difference, or I should say the lowest bit of sensory information, the absolute threshold before somebody can detect that there's been a change in the in essentially flavorless water. Smell, using chemical substances that enter the nose. 1 drop of perfume spread throughout a 6-room apartment. That's pretty remarkable. Pretty sizable, pretty large apartment that we can take a single drop of perfume and just kind of walk throughout and do our best to spread it evenly throughout. At that level, then we can detect a smell has entered into the environment. And lastly, touch, using movement of or pressure on the skin. A bee's wing falling on your cheek from a height of about half an inch. That is the lowest level of sensory information that we can perceive, I'm sorry, that we can detect from the environment using our touch sense. Pretty remarkable stuff. Now, a lot of times I get these kinds of questions in class. Is subliminal messaging, is this possible? Can I listen to CDs in my sleep and wake up smarter and know more information? And I want to take this as a chance to talk about for a brief moment the difference between one person reporting their experiences versus taking the data of hundreds or even thousands of people. Now there are going to be, of course, some people who say, I can go to bed at night, I can play this maybe a long series of music tracks, and I can wake up and I can tell you, what a lot of the tracks were. Or you can play, when I learn German in class, I don't do nearly as well as when I spend like 2 weeks going to bed at night with like German CDs playing, and because I know it's sticking with me. Again, there are going to be some instances, and it's very difficult to determine whether that's genuine and valid and true or not. Likewise, those aren't usually controlled situations where we try to find out if people in general can have the same experience. A lot of things can play into that in terms of waking up in the middle of it and perhaps not realizing it, and then it enters into your more conscious awareness, or the level of volume that you're playing it at, or how long it takes for you to go to sleep. There are a lot of different variables at play there where a person could be saying, yeah, I'm hearing it, I'm taking it in, but they're not truly out cold, totally unconscious and dead asleep during certain periods. Like they're simply not going to necessarily pick up on it. Now, there's some scientific data that shows that some subliminal perception may occur, that it's possible to pick up on some things. Again, I'm not trying to say it's without a shadow of a doubt absolutely untrue. That never happens. But it's definitely not widely accepted scientific fact that everybody could absolutely benefit from listening to language CDs and whatnot in their sleep. That we're just going to simply wake up speaking French and German and whatnot. Likewise, there's little to no evidence of subliminal persuasion. For those of you old enough to recall the reference, I think it was Mr. Subliminal, or Subliminal Man, Kevin Nealon's character from Saturday Night Live, from the early '90s, and he would speak in this kind of comedic bit where he would put in like little insults and little persuasions in the middle of his speech. And of course, as the audience, we could all hear it just fine, but the characters he was speaking with would kind of respond a little oddly and seemingly be a little bit persuaded in some cases. Again, in the real world, that's not necessarily accurate. So, back on track. Regarding sensory adaptation, this is another important term with in regard to cognitive psychology. This is decreased sensitivity due to repeated or constant stimulation. Now, think of, for example, when you have a metal bar nearby, or you're at the bleachers of a football game. You reach down and you grab that metal bar, you touch the bleachers, and it feels very cold. Regardless of the temperature of the room, even often touching a metal surface will feel cold. However, if you keep your hand there long enough, it's going to feel. You're going to start to notice less that you're feeling it. Part of that, of course, could be due to the metal warming to your hand. But the basic idea here, though, is that your senses are adapting to it. That the novel experience of touching a cold bar for the first time is gone. You're not touching it for the first time. You are still touching it. And so now your attention and how you're using your senses may naturally be cast elsewhere in the room while you're touching that metal bar. By doing so, your senses are adapting to it and basically saying, okay, we're still holding this. I don't have to pay attention to this anymore. I don't have to take in the information, the raw data of the coldness of this bar over and over and over and over again to the brain because it's not causing any danger. So let's move into one of our senses. Perhaps one of our our most important senses is vision. So light essentially is a form of electromagnetic energy that moves in waves. A little bit of physics here. And there are various types of electromagnetic waves, and they form the electromagnetic spectrum. So some examples here we can see. We think of it in terms of wavelengths. At least in terms of one of the areas of light waves. Wavelengths is the distance between these successive peaks. So a longer wavelength, kind of a low frequency, gradual up and down, that produces kind of reddish colors. Also, when it comes to sounds, that's also produces low pitch sounds, as sounds also produce a wavelength. A short wavelength can moving very quickly, a very high frequency of up and down, that produces bluish colors and kind of a high pitch sound. Now the wave of light that comes at a high amplitude, essentially the height from the peak to the trough, from the highest point to the lowest point, that's the amplitude, and that low amplitude has kind of dull colors, whereas high amplitude can produce very vibrant, very bright colors. And lastly, the range of the wavelength, the mixture of the waves. That when you have very complex waves or very simple kind of shaped waves, a small range / low complexity has kind of like less complex colors, less complex sounds, and then having a high range, a larger range with higher complexity produces very complex colors and very complex sounds. Again, just to touch on the terms again, wavelength, distance between the crests or the peaks. The frequency is how often a light or sound wave kind of cycles, and the amplitude is the height of a light or a sound wave. Here's an image of the electromagnetic spectrum, all the various levels of light that we see, and how the electromagnetic spectrum goes very far in both directions outside of where we see. If you take a look at the part of the image just below like AC circuits, broadcast bands, radar, microwaves, and so on, there's like the little wiggly line there of the frequency. You take a look at that little rainbow above our eyeball there, we see a very, very narrow, very specific range of light waves. Everything else outside of that, it just escapes our vision. For example, infrared rays and ultraviolet rays on kind of the closest opposite ends of our visible light spectrum. Going further down to the right, lower on the short waves, X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic rays, all that, and going into kind of longer, slower waves, we have microwaves, radar, broadcast bands, AC circuits. So the range that we see is extremely narrow, but that's where all of our colors lie. So regarding our vision versus the vision of animals, the flower on the left is essentially what we normally see. All the various a couple of different colors there with like kind of orangish yellow and like brownish, kind of black in the middle there, on kind of a shades of gray kind of surface, and but the one on the right, photographed under ultraviolet light, is going to pick up different wavelengths of or different light waves of light, and this is what we think that most animals and insects see. Now, looking at this, you can see that there's actually even a ring around the flower that doesn't at least as obviously exist, or hardly at all, on the flower on the left. So not only can can animals and insects perhaps see things with increased detail, but kind of the trade-off is that their range of color is also far more restricted than ours. Regarding the anatomy of the eye, the function of the eyes is to capture the light waves and focus them on receptors at the back of the eyeball. We have various different structures in our eyeball, and so our eyes move around to try to capture that light and to focus it specifically on our retina, so that we can begin taking that raw data from the environment and transmitting it, being able to receive that data so that we can transmit it down the optic nerve. Now, we have these structures within the retina called rods and cones. They detect various levels of light. Rods detecting black and white light, and cones detecting color. A way to remember this is cones, CO, start with the same letters as color, CO. So we have these rods and cones all layered throughout the backs of our eyeballs, and they're taking the information from the retina and detecting the various colors and shades and all that of the environment. Just another slide of how the eye sees. I touched on quite a bit of this already. Feel free to pause it if you want to read it for yourself. Otherwise, I'll move onward. Yet another one regarding the light coming in, the rods and cones receiving it, and whatnot. So vision research essentially helps us to explain how the shape of your eyeball creates two common visual problems: nearsightedness and farsightedness. Now, with normal vision, the image is focused on the retina. It lands exactly where it's supposed to land. However, nearsightedness, the eyeball is too long, and incoming light waves focus in front of the retina, which blurs the images for distant objects. So as you can see, the tree doesn't land exactly where it should on the retina, so that by the time it does reach the retina, there's kind of this blurriness, and it's kind of this a bit of a distorted picture. Farsightedness, the eyeball is too short, and the incoming light waves focus behind the retina, which also blurs the image, but more so for nearby objects. So your inability, or rather your difficulty to see things up close versus see things far away, is largely due to the shape of your eyeball, in terms of how much distance the light has to travel from the very front of your eye to the very back, ultimately landing on the retina. So color vision is a combination of two theories. The trichromatic theory explains that color perception results from three types of cones in the retina, and each is sensitive to different colors. That there's one sensitive to red, one sensitive to green, and another type that's sensitive to blue. The opponent process theory argues that color perception results from three systems of color opposites, that blue and yellow being color opposites, red, green being color opposites, and black, white, that we are more detecting the differences of colors rather than just simply taking the colors in directly. Here's a fun little trick. Stare at the dot in the middle of the flag for 60 seconds, then look at a white surface. You'll often see a regular red, white, and blue U.S. flag. This is also known as a negative after image. So go ahead and do that. You can pause the video. And then think about, after you've done this and you've tried the experiment out, think about how this might be related to the opponent process theory that I had just mentioned. So something that sadly many people have issues with is colorblindedness. It's very common in I shouldn't say very common. It's more common in males than it is in females, as it is typically understood as an X-linked genetic factor. So people who have a red-green color deficiency would have trouble perceiving the green color number in the center of the circle. So if you're taking a look at this and you don't see a big green 7, then you may have red-green color blindness. And yes, I was just joking. That's a green 3. Fun little trick I like to do in class. Anyway, so let's move on to audition. Sound results from the movement of air molecules in a particular wave pattern. Sound waves, again, just like light, vary in length, known as wavelength, and in height, known as amplitude. Regarding the ear's anatomy, we have the outer ear, in this case it's colored gold, where the pinna, the auditory canal, and the eardrum lie. The middle ear is that thin little blue shaded area where the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup lie. And lastly, the inner ear, the kind of purplish color, that's where the cochlea, the semicircular canals, and the vestibular sacs lie. The cochlea, which kind of looks like a little snail there in the purplish area, contains key receptors for hearing. Now, again, most importantly from this, and you can pause and read this slide, most importantly, it's little hairs in our ears that seem to have the most to do with taking the sound waves and turning them into something that the rest of the ear can begin to make sense of in order to translate it, and then transmit it to the brain. So really, we have all these tiny little hairs inside of our ears that that process, or rather, kind of move around based on the vibrations that they feel. We have various different structures along the way that move and vibrate as a result of sound waves, and the information essentially just gets sent and kind of translated onward and onward into the rest of our ear, and then eventually turn into that neural impulse. Regarding pitch perception, a couple different theories. First is place theory. This argues that pitch perception is linked to the particular spot on the cochlea's basilar membrane that is most stimulated. So there's going to be a part in the cochlea's basilar membrane where that would pick up a pitch at perhaps a high level or low level, and it's all based on the physical location of wherever the sound lands in the cochlea. The frequency theory argues that pitch perception occurs when a nerve impulse sent to the brain matches the frequency of the sound wave, that our neural impulses actually mimic, kind of like mirror, the sound wave itself, that would argue kind of a more direct route of sound. Now, I mean, it still goes through your ear and all through the structures and everything, but the frequency theory argues that the neural impulses would essentially kind of vibrate in a very similar frequency as the sound wave itself. The loudness of a sound is measured in decibels. Constant noise above 90 decibels can cause permanent nerve damage and irreversible hearing loss. 90 decibels falls right about at the line just above heavy traffic. So if you're surrounded by cars and trucks and you've got your windows rolled down and there's just a lot going on, horns honking and whatnot, you're actually sitting pretty high on the level uh, of loudness in terms of potential hearing damage. Like you're about to enter into the range of potential hearing damage. When you are standing near a subway or a train, you're listening to probably about 100 decibels of sound. Again, being on the outside rather than the inside. A lot of rock concerts, depending on how far away from the speakers you are, assuming that you're kind of in the middle of the mix and everything, you're exposed to about 120 decibels. Of course, when you get much closer and you're right up next to the speaker, it's going to be getting pretty dangerous. The threshold of pain lies at about 130 decibels. A jet airplane, just full blast, and standing out there without any hearing protection is absolutely going to feel painful, and it's going to be causing some significant damage. And of course, the loudest being a space shuttle launch. If you ever find yourself without hearing protection and you're standing on a platform of a space shuttle that's about to launch, you're about to go deaf. So don't do that. Jumping down to the bottom end of the range, quiet office work, quiet automobile, you're still sitting at about 40 or 50 decibels. A lot of dishwashers float around like kind of the 50 decibel range as well. Just kind of give you an idea of how loud even seemingly kind of quiet things can be. Normal conversation, listening to myself right now, could be anywhere between 50 and 60 decibels. Now, regarding our other senses, I won't spend as much time on these, but olfaction is the sense of smell. We have these receptors for smell embedded in our nasal membrane. It's known as the olfactory epithelium. In there we have the olfactory bulb, we have this kind of like bone dividing everything, then the olfactory receptor cell, and olfactory epithelium below that. And that's when different chemicals enter into our receptors. We have these things that are the olfactory bulb, epithelium, and receptor cells. They are all there ready to catch the chemicals that are kind of floating through the air, so that we can make sense of their smell. Regarding taste, gustation, the sense of taste, we have receptors for taste on our tongue, and these are taste buds located in papillae on the surface of the tongue. You can see in the picture in the upper right corner, the surface of the tongue magnified about 50 times. You can see all the little buds. They're ready to capture the chemicals that are falling onto it from various foods and liquids that we're consuming. Regarding skin senses, these involve three different skin sensations. Touch, or just feeling the pressure that something has touched your skin. Temperature, being able to determine whether something is hot or cold. And pain, actually doing damage, physical damage to the skin. That's going to have a unique kind of set of receptors to notify the brain that skin has been damaged. The receptors for these occur in various concentrations and depths in the skin. You're going to see that in some parts of the body, there are very few receptor cells to take in the sensory information, and other parts of the body where there's going to be very, very many of them. Let's jump back. Before I go into that, one little test that you may be able to do with somebody else. It doesn't work nearly as well if you do it with yourself, but ask somebody first, you would close your eyes, and then ask somebody to touch your finger with like the tip of a pen in one spot, and then to wait a few seconds, and then touch a point on your finger about like a quarter inch or so up or down your finger, and to touch it again, and with your eyes closed, see if you can determine whether they've moved up or down your finger, just in a quarter inch. Many times you'll be able to determine accurately that it's gone up or gone down. Again, with like about 5 second or 10 second delay in between each touch. Now, turn around and with your eyes closed, ask the person still to touch a point in the middle of your back, or perhaps even a couple inches off to the side of your spine, with the tip of a pen. Wait about 10 seconds, and then move a quarter inch up or down or sideways or what have you, and to touch again, and see if you can reliably report up or down or left or right. In most cases, you'll be unable to, because we have very few, relatively speaking, fewer receptors for sensation on our back, as well as the way our brain is mapped. We don't have nearly as much kind of uh, touch sensors, as well as kind of brain surface area to make sense of location differences within touch on our back, compared to our fingers, where we use our hands, all the time, always touching things and grabbing onto things, and we need to know where things are placed and how we're grabbing things and holding onto things with our fingers. So our hands are very important in terms of sensory information. Therefore, we have a lot more receptors for touch sensation within our hands than we do in our backs. So just a little experiment, something to kind of try out with somebody else, and you can reverse it for them, and they can experience it for themselves as well. Now, the vestibular sense, kind of the sense of balance, not one of the five senses, but still something important to mention, involves the vestibular sacs and the semicircular canals located within the inner ear. That when you have an ear infection, an earache, or anything that's kind of messing with your ears, your sense of balance can easily be thrown off, because that's where your sense of balance is located. Some theories behind that is that we see animals in the wild that turn their heads and turn their ears to try to locate something, whether it's high or low, side to side, and kind of will position their body in such a way so that they're prepared to run off or and escape or fight if needed. So having that sense of balance of how your body is positioned, and whether it's going to topple over or if it's going to be geared to run in a certain direction towards or away from danger, that all lies within, at least the sense of balance, all lies within your inner ear. Kinesthesia is also very important in helping us determine how our body is oriented in its environment. Kinesthesia provides our brain with information about posture, orientation, and movement. Kinesthetic receptors are located in our muscles, our joints, and our tendons. Now, just a little jump ahead, a little clue into, or sneak peek into what's coming up in the next lecture. We'll be talking more about perception, a little bit of, we'll have some fun with optical illusions, and kind of showing how our senses may provide us with very reliable information, but our brains can often provide us with unreliable information as it tries to make sense of the sensory information that we're producing, that our senses are providing from the environment. So that's all I've got for today regarding sensory information and just a tiny bit of perception, and we will continue this next time. We'll be using the same PowerPoint as this lecture, so if you are viewing the PowerPoint right now with the sensory lecture, feel free to glance ahead if you'd like, but you'll probably be spoiling some of the fun that will be coming next time around with the perception lecture. So try to hold off. So until next time, I'll see you later.